Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Tom.
Hey, it's day 2 of our British apples are making a comeback. This is our culture unit, and we've been talking about British apples. And to be honest, I must confess I didn't even know that the British grew apples. I'd never heard of them before, but I'm finding out that, they grow lots of apples, and they're good apples, too. On the first day, we're talking about how they take apples, here at least, and instead of selling the apples at the grocery stores here, we do see a product made from British apples, and that is alcoholic hard cider. They probably just call it hard cider instead of alcoholic hard cider. They want to kind of point out the fact that it is alcohol. It shouldn't be a drink for kids. But that's popular in stores. You can buy bottles of it. And also if you have a bar in your neighborhood, maybe they sell it as well. That's popular.
And of course, apples are adored by a lot of people because they have a long shelf life. They're tasty. They've got lots of nutrition. And you can make them into desserts or other kinds of alcoholic beverages or just apple juice or apple cider. That's perfectly okay.
Yeah.
And yes, indeed, they love apples in Britain, but they're not actually from there. They were brought by the Romans, and then later they brought in other varieties, and they mixed and matched them. They made hybrids of apples, and now they've got some varieties or kinds of apples in England that are probably not available in other places. And today we're going to talk about why British apples are making a comeback, why they're becoming more and more popular again, especially because the fact that there's only 40% of the domestic apples consumed in the UK, they import the other 60% from France and the US and probably other places.
They do. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to read through today's lesson, and then we'll be back.
According to a 2022 study, 81% of traditional British orchards have disappeared since the beginning of the 20th century. The cause of this is urbanization and agricultural land changes, and it means that huge numbers of heritage apple varieties are no longer available to most people. However, I have some encouraging news. Tom Adams calls himself an apple detective. Apple detectives work to find apple varieties that were thought lost and then add them to the approximately 2,200 species recorded in Britain's National Fruit Collection. Adams has recently caused a bit of a stir in the apple detective community. While investigating a neglected orchard, he came across a single tree bearing bright yellow apples. Neither Adams nor records could identify the mysterious variety. After a lot of research, Adams finally found out that the apple was a Bringewood Pippin, a dessert cider variety that dates to around 1800. Adam believes this tree is the only one of its kind left. While Tom Adams's story sounds incredible, there are others like it. Many apple detectives just like Adams are working to recover lost apple varieties and restore orchards up and down the country. In 1990, an environmental group, the Common Ground, helped pioneer the apple revival by starting a campaign to advocate saving traditional orchards. Over the years, the organization has seen a surge both in orchard planting and people's interests in growing apples and producing cider. I find it sad that British supermarkets currently only stock half a dozen or so apple varieties. However, if the current trend in apple growing persists, the availability of new flavors may very well be just around the corner. Okay, it's time for us to discuss the contents of our lesson for today. So here in the first paragraph, it says, according to a 2022 study, 81% of traditional British orchards have disappeared since the beginning of the 20th century. Now, an orchard is a place with a lot of trees, and those trees produce fruit, okay? So an apple orchard, a peach orchard, a pear orchard, those are all very common forms of orchards. Again, the food that they produce are grown on trees.
In my hometown where I grew up, where my parents bought land and built a house, it used to be an orange orchard. In fact, all of East Mesa, where I grew up, was just orange orchard after orange orchard. There are still quite a few of the orchards left, and it makes my city smell so good in the spring because, they blossom. We have little orange blossoms that open up in the spring, and it's like heaven. So, yeah, if you are lucky enough to live around an orchard, you probably have some really sweet-smelling air when it's time for those blossoms to bloom. So, 81% of traditional British orchards have disappeared. Oh, it's such a sad piece of news. So they don't have many orchards. I don't think there are many farms left in the UK in general. We're losing our farms everywhere, and farms make up, just the freshest, best food that we can buy. So I hate to see that we're losing some of these orchards and farms, at least. So the cause of this, it says, is urbanization. What is urbanization? It means taking land and turning it from the countryside into the city. So you're talking about building very tall buildings and lots of streets and stores and traffic, and that's where most of us are living these days, in the city centers instead of out in the country and enjoying fresh air, clean air, all of those good things.
This happens all over the place as populations increase. They build more buildings and tear down forests and stuff like that and suck up all the farmland. Maybe that's going to be a reverse trend here in Taiwan because the population isn't really increasing. So maybe there's going to be ruralization. I don't know if you can use that word like that, but it would be interesting. And yes, indeed, we've got urbanization in the UK and land changes there as well. And it means that huge numbers of heritage apple varieties are no longer available to most people. So heritage apple varieties are just kinds of apples that exist in England and have been there for quite some time. And yes, indeed, a lot of them have simply just gone extinct. They don't have them anymore because there aren't enough farmers to grow them, or people just aren't interested in eating them anymore.
Yeah, a heritage apple variety actually means it's never been made into a hybrid. It's the original form. So it's very old-fashioned. It's probably very old if they have some of these heritage apple varieties. And it says here that most of them are no longer available to most people. But our author says, however, I have some encouraging news. Oh, we have some good news to share. Some news that will make you feel like there's still hope. If something's encouraging, it gives you hope, confidence, just makes you feel like things aren't so bad. The future looks good. So what is this encouraging news, Tom?
Well, it's news concerning this guy called Tom Adams, and he calls himself an Apple detective. A detective, of course, is somebody who tries to find information to solve a crime or to figure a puzzle out. And Apple detectives work to find apple varieties that were thought lost and then add them to the approximately 2,200 species recorded in Britain's National Fruit Collection. So he's going out there trying to find these apple varieties that people thought were gone. People thought they were lost. So he's trying to find them. He probably has to go to apple orchards all over the place, or anywhere where there's an apple tree growing, and then he makes a note of them. He adds them to the number of species recorded in the National Fruit Collection. At the current time, there are approximately more or less 2,200 species recorded in that collection.
Wow, that's a lot of species. It's really interesting. It must not just be apples, though, right? It's the National Fruit Collection. There are probably some pears and other fruits in there. So Tom Adams has recently caused a bit of a stir. Now, usually we use stir as a verb to say you're going to take a spoon and move your food around in a pot. Maybe you're cooking something on the stove and you want to stir it so it doesn't burn the bottom of that pot, or maybe you're using a frying pan. If you don't keep stirring something, it does burn. So here, though, he's causing a stir. If you cause a stir, you're causing something to be talked about, or you're forcing people to begin to concentrate on something. Maybe you're stirring things up by causing trouble. Maybe you're arousing strong feelings in people, and that leads to an argument or a debate. Here, he's caused a bit of a stir. People are talking about it in the Apple detective community. What has he done to get people stirred up?
Well, it goes on to say, while investigating a neglected orchard, he came across a single tree bearing bright yellow apples. So, of course, he was looking at all these different orchards around the country. One was neglected. The trees were still there, but nobody was really paying attention to it. It was just kind of growing wild. So he went in there and checked it out, and then he came across, or he found just one tree there all by itself, and it was bearing bright yellow apples. He thought that was unusual. He thought that was kind of strange. And neither Adams nor records could identify the mysterious variety. So he looked at it and he thought, I don't know what that is. Let me check out the record. And there was no record in the record about this particular tree. Neither Adams nor the records could identify the mysterious variety. If something is mysterious, it's unknown. We don't know about it. And sometimes, of course, that can be very difficult to understand, and you can't tell people what it is. So, yes, it was mysterious. Nobody knew what kind of tree that was. What's that tree doing there with those yellow apples? It's really weird.
Yeah, it would be very surprising and probably shocking to someone who calls himself an apple detective. So after a lot of research, he probably read through lots of old records and was going through books trying to find this particular species. He finally found out that the apple was a Bringewood pippin. That's the name of the species. It's a dessert cider variety. So it's the kind of apple you would use to make some sort of dessert or drink, an apple cider drink. And it dates to around 1800. You could also say dates back. They're both correct. To around 1800. That's a long time ago. Adams believes this tree is the only one of its kind left. I bet they put something in the news asking for people to report in if they did have this kind of tree in their yard.
Right, and now that they know what kind of tree this is, they can probably gather some apples and collect the seeds. And if anybody's interested, they can try to plant those seeds and grow some more trees so they can produce more of this particular variety of apple. And they probably can do that with all sorts of different kinds of apple trees, especially if they are endangered or if they are about to disappear. Well, that brings us to the midway point in our lesson for today. It's time for us now to listen to our apple-loving Chinese teacher.
听众朋友大家好，我是安娜。我们昨天带大家看看英国啊，大家都在吃苹果，不是只有吃苹果，苹果派、苹果甜点，还有 cider 苹果酒，喝好多等等。可是作者昨天在文章最后面说啊，目前英国食用的苹果大概只有 40% 是当地种植的，所以好像感觉上这个收尾有点负面哦。那到底要怎么样让英国的苹果来一个复兴之路呢？我们来看看今天作者怎么说。他一开始就告诉我们啦，根据一个2022年的研究，其实自从20世纪以来啊，就有 81% 的英国传统的果园就消失了耶。当然这是一个承接昨天文章那一句话，也就是 40% 是当地这件事情延续下来的第二篇文章。可是同样在第一段的第一句，我们还是要注意一下句型齁。再提醒大家一次，如果你看到句子当中有 since，这个 since 会加一个过去的时间，但是它的文意就是包含到现在为止。再说一次哦 ，since 的意思是从过去的某个时间点到现在为止，重点是后面的到现在为止，所以它的时间会从过去某个时间点拉到现在。描述动作的一段时间就会用完成式，时间拉到现在就会搭配现在完成式，所以句子只要有 since 加过去时间都会搭配现在完成式。所以自从20世纪到现在为止就已经如何如何，或者是过了多久，这个动作持续了多久。 好，当然作者是以解释在第二句里面，这就是因为都市化啊，农业土地变更啊，而这样子就意味着就是大多数人其实再也吃不到传统的一种苹果的品种。在第二句我们要特别注意什么呢？我们特别注意逗点之后的 and it means。 首先这里的 it 你可以去判断它其实就是逗点前面整句话的意思，也就是为什么传统果园会消失呢？就都市化嘛，农地的土地就变更了嘛。但是如果你眼睛尖一点的话，你会发现逗点之后的 and 就是一个连接词，连接词后面就加上代名词。在英文当中有一个字，它本身就有连接词加代名词的功能。连接词加代名词，它不就是产生连接关系的代名词，那不就是关代吗？所以你把 and it 圈起来，就给它等于一个which。那这样你对关代就有更深的认识了。好，我们要赶快进到第二段咯。那作者说，虽然我们现在谈的有点负面，但是有一些消息还不错，因为第二段介绍了一个专家 Tom Adams， 他是一个苹果侦探哦，他就是在找那些被认为已经失落的苹果的果种，而且然后呢，把它们加在英国国家水果收藏中心的记录里面，现在已经有2200个品种了。Adams 呢，他现在最近就是发现了一个事情引起一些轰动，因为他发现了一个结着亮黄色苹果的树，但是不管 Adams 还是文献的记载，都没有办法辨识出这个品种。所以我们要先看一下最重要的第二段第5句这个地方。一开始出现的是 neither， 看到 neither 的话呢，你就想说可能要倒装咯，没有，它这里是连接着 Adams nor records。 其实我们要把 neither nor 2个字都抓出来，它是一个连接词片语。我们通常会说 neither A nor B， 文意就是不是 A 也不是 B， 也就是说句子的主词是不是 Adams也不是其他的记录。可是在这边就是有一个很重要的事情，到底我的动词要怎么样做变化呢？原则上你只要看到 neither A nor B， 因为非 A 也非 B 嘛，所以动词就是跟靠近动词的这个 B 来走。当然在这句话当中我们不用做任何变化，我们有一个情态的这个 could identify， 有一个 can 这个能不能辨认出的能，所以不用做任何变化。但是 neither A nor B 动词是跟着 B 来变化的。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. We're talking about an Apple detective today called Tom Adams. And he is, I guess, going around his country, all the countries in the United Kingdom, and doing some investigative work. He's trying to find out what apple varieties still exist there. And when we left you, he had just found one single tree that was bearing bright yellow apples. So after a lot of research, he finally found out that it did have a name, and it was called a Bringewood pippin, and it was used for desserts or maybe some apple cider. And it goes all the way back to 1800. So he thinks this is the only tree, the only one of its kind. That's how we say it's the only one of its kind left.
And hopefully they can grow more of it now that they've got the seeds in their hands.
Yeah.
And here in the next paragraph it says, while Tom Adams's story sounds incredible, there are others like it. So even though his story does sound pretty cool, it sounds incredible, well, there are other stories like it as well. Many apple detectives, just like Adams, are working to recover lost apple varieties and restore orchards up and down the country. So he's not the only one. There are lots of other apple detectives going around England and Scotland and Wales and maybe Northern Ireland and the Isle of Man or whatever.
Yeah.
And they're looking for apple trees and they're trying to save them if they're in trouble. And yes, indeed, this is not surprising to me because the British just love their gardens, okay? They just love working with plants and working outdoors. So if anybody can save the apple population of the world, it would be the British.
Well, what they're trying to do is work to recover lost apple varieties and restore orchards up and down the country. We use that phrase up and down the country when we're talking about someone traveling far and wide, trying to either make a big journey to discover something or maybe just going a long vacation and they're going up and down the country. He went up and down the street trying to sell his newspapers. You can do up and down for a lot of things. So if you restore something, you're taking something that has lost its original condition and you're bringing it back to its original condition, or maybe you're bringing it back to its original place or position. Maybe you're repairing or renovating something. Maybe you're restoring a painting at a museum. They have special people who restore works of art, maybe adding a little paint here and there to them. So he's trying to restore orchards up and down the country, get people planting more apple trees.
Yeah, I've got a friend in Pittsburgh who likes to restore old motorcycles. He bought an old Ducati and an old Kawasaki, and he's been working on them to make them as good as new.
So his hobby, huh?
Indeed, as his hobby, besides his job as a painter. But in any case, they're trying to restore orchards up and down the country. I think we also say up and down the country because the UK is kind of like a north-south sort of country. It has more north and south than it does east and west.
Right.
I don't think we would say up and down the country if we're referring to the United States because that's kind of left and right or east and west. But then we're continuing here. In 1990, an environmental group, the Common Ground, helped pioneer the apple revival by starting a campaign to advocate saving traditional orchards. So this is an environmental group, and they've got an interesting name here, the Common Ground. Oftentimes, if you say you and somebody else have common ground, that means you have something in common and that you can work together. And it's interesting here because ground is also where plants are grown. So the Common Ground, of course, is an environmental group. And yes, indeed, they have pioneered the apple revival by starting this campaign. Now, a revival is just bringing something back to life, okay? Revival, okay? V-I-V there refers to life, and re means again. So just basically giving something a rebirth or a renaissance.
If you're a performer, at least in theater or maybe opera, Broadway musicals in particular, they'll bring back revivals. Maybe they were performing The Phantom of the Opera 20 years ago, and then they stopped for about 5-10 years, and then they decided, hey, that was a pretty good show, let's bring it back. And it's called a Broadway revival. So they bring that back. Here they're trying to help pioneer the apple revival by campaigning to save traditional orchards. If you advocate for something, you are trying to convince people to support a particular cause. Some people advocate for children. They try to represent and support children going to better homes. If their parents are put into prison or they die and they need a foster parent or to be adopted, they will advocate for children. So here they're advocating saving traditional orchards, which is wonderful. And over the years, the organization has seen a surge or growth. A surge is a growth in something, both in orchard planting, so they're planting trees, and people's interests in growing apples and producing cider, which is all great.
Pretty cool. So yes, indeed, they might find some people with an apple tree in their yard and they might encourage them to actually produce apples from that tree and sell them in the market. So that's good news there. And here's our final paragraph. It says, I find it sad, or I think it's sad, that British supermarkets currently only stock half a dozen or so apple varieties. So here we've got the word stock. It's being used as a verb here. That just means they have this stuff available for their customers. They just basically have it on the shelves. They only stock half a dozen or so varieties. So only 6 different kinds of apples can be purchased in British supermarkets. And if you're an expert in apples, you know that there are probably dozens, if not hundreds, of varieties of apples out there.
Yeah, but you know what? I think having 6 different apple varieties would be a lot for a grocery store.
For me, that's about all I know about of apples.
Yeah, I think I only know about 6, actually. So it'll be interesting if they can stock more than just 6 varieties. That's quite a bit, though. You might go to the grocery store and be told that the item you want to buy is out of stock, which means they've sold out. Their supply is gone. They're waiting to get a new shipment in, and so they will tell you something's out of stock. They might give you something called a rain check, which is a slip of paper saying if you bring that back when we get the new order in, we'll give you the same price or we'll hold some for you. So stock, we use that quite a bit just in terms of things that are sold in stores. So it says the current trend, and if it continues, this current trend in apple growing, if it persists, it just keeps going. It doesn't stop. Maybe you have a goal and you're just about ready to give up, but your parents say, hey, you need to persist. You keep going. Don't give up. So persist is a great word if you have some sort of goal, but you're facing opposition. Don't let it stop you. You persist past it. So we hope that the trend persists and keeps going, that people don't give up on it, because the availability of new flavors may very well be just around the corner. Tom, what's just around the corner mean?
It means very close at hand. It's going to happen very soon. So if you're in the UK and you're looking for different kinds of apples, very soon you're going to be able to find lots of different kinds. It will be an apple paradise there.
Yeah, no kidding.
Absolutely. That brings us to the end of our discussion for today. Let's listen now to our Chinese teacher.
所以我们刚刚就提到说啊，在第2段里面就没有办法辨认这个品种嘛，后来发现原来是一个新的品种诶。好，接下来我们就提到啦，在第3段里面，虽然 Tom Adams 的故事让人真的难以置信，但是也有类似的一些故事诶。我们在第3段请看一下第1句的地方，最后面 There are others， 有其他的，这个 others 如果加了 s 就代表它是一个代名词，而且代替的是复数的人事物。在这里当然是根据文章来推断，我们看到的 others 指的是 other stories， 其他的故事。不过我们要特别注意一下，同样在第3段第2句里面，后面一点点有一个 up and down。 up and down 本来有来来回回的意思，它在这里指的是遍及全国，遍及全英国。文章到了最后面第4段的时候啊，其实又出现了一个句型。在第1句，作者说，我觉得这件事情很伤心。什么事呢？从 that 到句尾，文章说明的是，我对于英国超市现在货架上只有6种左右的苹果果种感到很难过，很伤心。好，所以大家呢或许会觉得英国这个苹果的复兴之路呢还有一段距离，不过至少我们大家也都真为这议题做一些了解咯。我是安娜，我们下次见。
That brings us to the end of our lesson for today, and I'm imagining that most of our listeners out there are feeling like me. When the lesson is over, we're going to head down to the local fruit market and buy some apples.
Yeah.
From all of us here at English Digest, my name is Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.